Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm here with my final update for my eyeshadow usage in 2023. I have quite an exciting update for you guys today. We are obviously now in 2024 and I can finally tell you how I did with my eyeshadow usage last year. If you are new to my channel, if you haven't followed the series before, I did have a goal this year to use every single eyeshadow in my collection at least once. Obviously, if I used each shadow more than that, was amazing. But I wanted to reach for every single eyeshadow that I owned. So that is kind of what I've been following in this project, showing you how I did and how many eyeshadows I have used. So I will show you where I was at the last quarter as well as how I've done in the last 3 months. So before I jump into that, if you're new here, please consider subscribing. I would love to have you in the family. Let's jump into the video. So let's do a little quick recap. So at the last update, I had used 44 out of my 52 palettes. I had used 538 out of my 651 eyeshadows in palettes, which is 82.6%. Palettes I used was 84.6%. Singles I had used was only at 279 out of 510, so that was 54.7%. And in total in my collection I had used 817 eyeshadows out of 1161. So that was 70.4%. And obviously at that point we were at the quarter point of the year, so 75% throughout the year or through the year. So I was a little bit behind. So what I had left to reach for was 11 palettes. That was how many I had left to that I hadn't reached no pan left behind on yet. And with those palettes, I had 113 eyeshadows in palettes I needed to reach for. And with my singles, I had 231 eyeshadows to use. So in total, for the last quarter, I had 344 eyeshadows to use, which was on average 114.77 per month. So that was a little quick recap of where I was last month. I talked about this in my last update, but I just wanted to refresh it before I go into the numbers today. So first up, what I will do is I will talk you through each palette that I used in the past month and just show you if I was able to reach for them no pan left behind or not. So the first palette that I reached for in the past quarter, not in like chronological order, but from my list down, we have my Anastasia Sultry palette. I used majority of this palette this past quarter. I only had like a handful of shades used before. I think maybe even used one. So I have reached for all of the shades in here now. And again, I reached for most of this in the last 3 months. From Anastasia, I also have this palette right here, which is the Carly Bible palette, which looks like this. This is a palette that I hadn't reached for at all before this quarter, so this is completely no pan left behind in the past 3 months. But yeah, I have reached for all of the shades in here, which is also another success story. Another palette that I reached for no pan left behind that I no longer have in like its full capacity anymore is the Jackie Aina palette from Anastasia. I have made a video where I combined that with my Anastasia Subculture palette, so I now have like a Franken palette with those two. But I did reach for that palette in the past quarter as well. I have 2 palettes from Pat McGrath. The first one is the Subliminal palette, which looks like this. Again, I hadn't reached for any of these shades before this past quarter, so I reached for all of them in the end of the year. But again, I have reached for this one, no pan left behind. We also have this one here, which is the Divine Rose 2 palette. And again, it is one that I hadn't reached for at all before, but luckily I was able to reach for this one as well, no pan left behind, so we have another complete palette. We have a little quad next, which is my Charlotte Tilbury Exaggerate quad, which looks like this. This one I have also reached for all of the 4 shades in the past 3 months, so yeah, I reached for this one too. I used to reach for this one in one look. It was really, really fun, but this one is also completed. The next palette though, I reached for majority of these shades prior to the last quarter, but at the very beginning of this past quarter, so what was that, in October, I had a couple of shades left to reach for and I did that, and that was my Wilderness palette. So again, I can't remember what shades it was that I reached for in here, but I had like maybe 2-3 left to reach for, so I completed that goal as well. Another palette that I reached for very recently, no pan left behind, is this one here, which is the Oden's Eye Elva palette. I hadn't reached this one at all earlier this year, so it is another one that I focused on only in the last 3 months. Actually, I reached for all of these in December, so only in the last month I finished this one. But yeah, another completed palette. So we have 2 more palettes to go. Next up we have the Mountain Trail palette from Sydney Grace. This one I don't even remember when I reached for this one, no pan left behind, because it's so long ago. but I believe it must have been in October as well, because again, it doesn't feel like I reached for this one this quarter. So very early in the quarter I reached for this one, but again, all 9 shades were reached for that month. And then we have one final palette to talk about, and that is the Luna Beauty Eternal Eclipse palette, which looks like this. Again, it's another palette that I have reached no palette behind on, and I reached for all of these shades in the past month actually, but yeah, in the last quarter as well. So this palette is also done. So if you're counting, I've been showing you 10 palettes so far, which means I'm missing one, but that is because that is another palette that I have actually let go of. I decluttered the BH Cosmetic Blueberry Muffin palette, and that was also a palette that I need to reach for in the past quarter. I did keep a couple shades from that palette, but I have reached for all of those, and they're now in my singles collection. So that is also a completed palette, which means that I have now talked about 11 palettes, and all of the ones that I've talked about, I have completed no pan left behind on, which means that I have reached for all of my remaining eyeshadows in palettes. So I have reached for 113 eyeshadows in palettes in the past quarter, which was 17.4%. So that is what I did in the past quarter, which is really, really amazing, which means, again, I have 100% when it comes to palettes, but I'm going to talk about the total in a second. When it comes to singles, I'm not going to show you all the singles. I usually don't do that in these updates. I just talk you through the numbers. So when it comes to singles, I had 231 left to reach for, like I mentioned earlier. And I'm happy to say that I have reached for all of them. And that was 45.3% of my singles, which again is amazing. I'm so happy that I was able to reach for that many of my singles. I'm gonna be honest though, I haven't updated this spreadsheet with everything that I bought in the past quarter. I didn't bring anything in, I think, in October when it comes to eyeshadow palettes, but in November I did bring in quite a lot. But I have mentioned this in other videos, but I don't add those things. So anything from November onwards, I don't add into my spreadsheet until January. So in January, well, we are in January now, but these numbers are from last month and last year. So I will update the numbers now, and that can reflect what I have in my collection. But as of last month, as of the end of the year, where at that point I had 510 singles. I know I decluttered a couple, and then also brought in some, but for the transparency of this video, I'm going to count those numbers. So again, that means that I have 100% of my singles reached for, and in collaboration with my 100% reached for eyeshadows in palettes, that means that I have hit my goal. Finally, I have reached for every single eyeshadow in my collection in 2023, which feels unreal because I've not even been close to those numbers before. But yeah, I'm really, really excited about that. So just to wrap up again, in the past quarter, I reached for 344 eyeshadows, and that was 29.6%. So I am so ecstatic. I can't express how happy I am that I managed to reach for everything. It's not something that I'm probably going to try to do next year because it has been quite an effort to do, and I have other focuses next year to do with my eyeshadow collection, but I'm going to try to reach for as many of my eyeshadows as I can throughout next year as well, because it's something that I want to keep going. Obviously, I have this massive collection, and I don't want it to sit there and not be used, but I will probably focus more on my favorite shades, things like that, and maybe not be so honed in on using every single individual pan of eyeshadow. But that was basically it for today. Before I wrap up the video, I thought I would give you a little summary because I have been tracking how I've been doing with my usage for the last 4 years. We have 2020, 2021, 2022, and 2023. So in 2020, I used 175 eyeshadows, and that was 32.23% of my collection. So very low numbers compared to now. So yeah, that is kind of where I was at that point. Then in 2021, I did step up my usage a little bit, and I used 272 eyeshadows, which was 34.87%. So definitely higher. I mean, it's just slightly, it's 2% higher when it comes to percentage, but usage when it comes to eyeshadows, it was almost 100 more, which is really, really great. In 2022 was the first year where I tried to actually reach for all of my shades, but I didn't get even close. I reached for 703 eyeshadows, which was 70.16%. So not even 3/4 of my collection, 30% of my collection didn't get touched that year, but I did make an effort to try to reach for more shades. And then we have this year, which is where I reached for all of my shades. I have on the list here 1,161 eyeshadows, But in my spreadsheet now it's 1,147 because again I have declared a couple of things. But as of like obviously what I have used, I am gonna still count 1,161. So I am so ecstatic. I almost reached for double the amount of eyeshadows that I reached for last year. Not quite, but getting up there. So I'm so happy. And again, let me know if you want me to keep going with this project next year. Actually, I will somewhat keep going with this one next year. Not in the exact way, but I will include something similar to this in my big fat eyeshadow project, which I don't know, I think that will be up tomorrow, the introduction for that. So you can stay tuned for that. But I really hope you enjoyed this video. I love statistics videos, so I really hope you enjoyed this one too. And I hope you're having a lovely day wherever you are, and I will catch you in my next one. Bye guys.